So what did you do during the war and how did you become a hero? Well, I was in charge of Operation Mush. I thought about that, Operation Mush. In fact, the name of the bridges they gave them, the two names of the bridges they were going to save and keep intact was Ham and Jam. Ham and Jam. Those two bridges became such a powerful influence in the war, it saved tens of thousands of lives. Following the war, by taking those bridges intact, they named the bridge the Pegasus Bridge. And it was off of the patch that the British had worn of the winged stallion, which flew into, save, it's a methodical thing, so I don't want to get into a lot of mythology. But anyway, it's called the Pegasus Bridge because they flew in like a winged horse. In fact, when they flew in, they were the first on the ground behind enemy lines, and they led the D-Day Invasion. By 1214, 1215, his three glider planes were brought in over enemy lines and released. Their job was to glide into, right near the bridges, overwhelm the bridges, and hold them until relief came. Hold until relieved. The first plane landed within 50 yards of the bridge. The front of the plane was crashed. In fact, the two pilots flew right out the front windows. Everybody made it out safely. Second plane landed right behind them. The third one just disappeared and went off somewhere else. They never seen it for hours later. Within 15 minutes, they overwhelmed the bridge with 2 losses and 14 casualties and took those 2 bridges. So that was fascinating. They had trained for months. And I thought about that. In fact, the troops were bored with the amount of training, just constantly taking bridges, constantly taking bridges. They weren't supposed to talk about the bridges. In fact, anyone who mentioned the name bridge anywhere outside the compound would immediately be removed from command and sent back somewhere else. So they couldn't even say name bridge anywhere. But that's what they did for 6 months. Right before the invasion, they had what's called war games. Now, during the war games, their job was to take a bridge. The enemy, which was, of course, themselves, was going to stop them. So they knew they were going to come. They failed miserably in taking that bridge. But they learned by trial under fire. Now, are you drawing parallels in your mind? That's what I'm trying to do here. I'm going through a lot of specifics because in your mind, what I'm hoping you're doing is allowing God to prick your conscience. What I'm going to do is God says He will bring to remembrance all things. Now, I've got some scriptures that it's going to come into in telling this little story in just a few minutes. So what I'm doing now is I'm telling you a story, and I want you to let your mind go into the scriptures and how that parallels the trial by fire, learning under the conditions of fire. Because, see, you and I are in that condition right now, aren't we? This major thought he had everything in control. He had trained for 6 months. They had become so elite in everything they did, methodical in everything they did. When it came down to it, they failed in the war games. They didn't accomplish their mission. If he failed under fire, tens of thousands of people would have been killed. Now, think about that for you and I. Have you ever wondered why in the world am I going through what I'm going through? We've all thought that. We've been there from time to time. Saying, man, why has God let me go through this? Maybe there's an operation out there. Under Operation Overlord, there's Operation Mush. And all throughout the theater of Europe during this day, there was operations going on everywhere. Maybe there's an operation that God has for you that you have to go through the training process right now. Maybe it's establishing character. Maybe there's some flaws that got to be worked out so that when He needs you for a specific job, maybe it's Operation Westwego, Operation Gretna. Maybe it's Operation Fill Your Name In. One thing we know for sure, you've not been called to be wasted. You've not been called to do nothing. You have been called to do a work. Now, that work depends on what you do. Now, one of the things that come across in the parallel and the understanding is this man was humble. He never went to his superiors and said, you know, I don't want to do that. I want to go do what General so-and-so's doing over here. That looks like that's pretty exciting. He knew when he accepted that job, he had to count the cost. If they failed, he wasn't coming back, at least not alive. He would go into a military camp if he was taken alive, or he would be killed. But his commander told him, hold until relieved. Now, what I'd like to do here is I want to begin to build a story and take some of those parallels I gave you and go into a little bit of detail and talk about a few scriptures. Because I want you to put yourself in the place now, looking forward to whatever it is God has done in your life or has called you to be a part of. Now, that spirit, see, that's exciting. I saw that. People got notes out there just now. Like, okay, I'm ready for this. Okay, give it to me. Well, here's the thing is, I don't know what he's called you. Sometimes I don't even know what he's done for me to call me. One thing's for sure. Jesus Christ says, my Father works, I work. Says, let us work while it's day. The night's coming when no man can work. One of the most astounding parallels is that it was the middle of a war. Now, we're going into a war. And I'm not talking about World War III. I'm talking about a spiritual war that's at our doorstep today. You know, I plan on doing some recent articles and some messages because you see, Christianity today is under attack. If you don't think it is, just turn the news on, turn to the entertainment section, turn to the movie section, turn to TVs, listen to the music. If you don't think Christianity is under attack, then you have been living in a bubble. Now, I'm going to go read these scriptures, and if you would, just write them down and go back and look at them a little bit later. Please study them and see what, prove them for yourselves. But just to save time, so you can concentrate on what's going on, let me read these to you. Revelation 12:7 says, there was a war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. There's a spiritual war that's taking place, and Satan knows he has but a short time. Revelation 12:17, the dragon was enraged at the woman, and the woman is referred to as the church, the spiritual body or the spiritual organism of Jesus Christ, and went to make war. Now, when I talked about Operation Overlord, it's easy to picture all this military arsenal going on, there's troops, and hopefully we have all this video stuff coming up that you can look at. When you say war, D-Day, it's not hard to picture that, is it? But when you say that there's a war against the saints, how do you picture a spiritual war? When Daniel was praying, there was something that was bothering Daniel, and he went to God with, and he prayed and he fasted 21 days. When the angel finally got to him, he tells Daniel, he says, listen, from the day you first began your prayer, God heard you and sent me. He said, but there was a battle going on, and I couldn't break through. I couldn't get to you. So God sent a stronger angel, an archangel, Michael, to come in and help me to be able to get through to you to answer your prayer. How does that battle take place in heaven? You don't know, do you? I don't know. All we know is from scriptures that these battles are taking place, that there's these powerful angels and these powerful beings that are out there, and they're going after God's people. Now, when you see somebody on television, and that person's up there saying, I grabbed the devil by his tail, hogwash. God says that he has made mankind lower than the angels. They're stronger than we are. Without God's help, without Jesus Christ, the spiritual intervention, you and I cannot overcome those spirit beings. And anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you. The dragon was enraged at the woman. Brethren, that's you and I. Christianity is under attack, and against the rest of her offspring who obey God's commandments. People say you don't have to obey God's commandments. Probably not going to be under battle. Revelation 13:4. Men worshiped the dragon because he was given the authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like this beast? Now, we're going to look around the rest of the world as it pulls itself out of these disasters, and they're going to start praising us how great everything is, when it isn't going to be that way. Going to lull the rest of the world to a false sense of security, and then someone's going to come in peacefully and take over, and you're going to begin to see a rise against God's people like we've never seen it at the end time. And it says, who can make war against him? Revelation 13:7, he said he was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. There will be those that God will allow to go through a martyrdom. It says they will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them. So the battle that takes place, this is a real spiritual battle that's going to go on, and it's going to cause real physical deaths. It's going to cause real persecution to God's people. This is just not something that's out there that's just fake, that's just not, that's, you think, well, it's just a metaphor. You know, and I hear people say that, well, you know, it's just a metaphor. This world has moved itself away from the reality of God is real, because it has separated itself, and they wanted to live under this banner of separation of church and state. And because it's done that, you know, it's actually taken the reality of God and put him aside and put him in a little box till they want to use him. Now, I'm going to give you these little parallels, and I'll give you some scriptures in them. Here's what I've seen as some parallels. God called in World War II for the special mission he had, and you'll see it just like for you and I. He called ordinary men to perform special missions. They were specially trained to perform specific tasks. They learned by trials under fire. Each man was required, when they accepted the mission, to put their lives on the line. It was a team effort. The French resistance kept vigil watch always. Now, one thing about, let me digress just a second here. What's interesting is that the French resistance every single day would report back to the British what was going on with those two bridges. Every time a garrison moved in or moved out, every night the report was made. That report was updated to Major John Howard every single day, so that he didn't have any surprises when he came to take over that bridge. So it was a team effort for everybody involved. And if you ever wonder about the splitting of the church and the scattering of the power of the holy people, I can't help but to wonder, it's not very similar to what we've seen in France. There were people scattered all over Europe, and particularly in France, and every one of them had a specific job that they were doing. Well, the Germans couldn't catch them all. As one fell and overcame, the next one would step in place, and they would go on from there. Another one is he had to remain humble. If the task went to his head, his ego got in the way, his mission would fail. His team and tens of thousands of men would be killed. I thought about Matthew 24 when I read that again, that no flesh would be saved. Now, that's an important mission.